The following is a Comfortably Zoned Radio Network production.
Thank you, Tally Olson. We are back, comfortably zoned in a vat of pine tar. The guest and the co-author of the book is George Grimm. How are you, sir?
I'm good, Ralph. How are you? How's the book business?
The book business is good. This has been an exciting week for both of us. First week of publication, and we're starting to get it down. We've got some very, very good feedback. The one person that gave us a incredible verbal review was Marty Rose. And if you remember, George, Marty is my second grade classmate at PS 148, and Mert, and he is very impressed with the book. I got a beautiful picture of him holding the book. Yeah. It does me good to know that my real peer, because he was instrumental. He and his family were instrumental in my being so fanatical about sports, baseball in particular. I'll remind that Marty's uncle was a sports writer with the AP, and he would provide us with tickets to everything under the sun. The Knicks, the Rangers, they'd all paper the house with tickets, and we were fortunate enough to sit in some great seats for a lot of years and a lot of games. And just talking about sports with him as a kid fueled my interest on a daily basis. Right. So for him to respond this way to the book, which is basically our times, Marty and I, and the kids we grew up with, it was great. It was heartwarming. What can I say? And you know what's incredible, and we always plan for a 300-plus page book, and turns out we were pleasantly surprised. We didn't have to stretch anything. We didn't have to add any padding. But it's 500 pages, George. That's a nice work. You know what I miss? I miss working with you on a daily basis, deciding what goes in the book, what goes out, how it's configured. It was fun. We had a year and a half.
Look like, what the cover should look like.
Yeah, right. Exactly.
All those many covers we had.
Had a lot of covers and a lot of ideas for a title. Let's remember that at the beginning, I thought that my experiences with baseball and cannabis were worth writing a book about, in addition to the podcasting, what have you. I had some very serious interactions with a fellow by the name, I can't think of it. Who is the player that we were gonna?
Ferris Fane.
Ferris Fane, absolutely. I knew him in Sacramento, and I was very taken aback the way he was treated by the government and the cannabis laws at the time. He became a farmer, a cannabis farmer, after his career in baseball. Problem was it was illegal, and he was busted, served some time, if I'm not mistaken. It was, and I took up a cause. I was a cannabis activist all these many years, and I thought that would be the theme of the book. As we got into it, it became, into the book, you and I, it became a very minor part of my baseball experience, and we couldn't work in enough that made it worth mentioning, and we did the entire book without mentioning cannabis and even mentioning Ferris Fane. And for better or worse, I think it's a good idea. In the world we live in, people do not take seriously folks who are involved with cannabis. It just, in the baseball world, let's put it that way. And I didn't want to look back 20 years later. If only we would have presented it differently, and we wouldn't have done this. So I think we did well by changing the theme a little, and ergo changing the cover. And we changed the cover for, little technical reasons, but the cover that was printed with the book was the 28th edition of my messing with the cover. So that was a big part of my keeping my mind in the game all these many months. I want to refer to something. We put a picture in the book of you with Yogi Berra.
Right.
And didn't really explain that. How did that picture come to be?
Well, at the time I was a technical auditor, IT auditor with the Trust Company of New Jersey in Jersey City. I spent about 15 years there, and Yogi was scheduled to open up one of our branches to be the guest. The bank used to do that, bring in people to open the branch. And my buddy Steve Carroll and I, being auditors, we found out that this was going to happen. And being auditors, we kind of make our own way. We kind of do what we want until somebody tells us not to. And so we got down to the branch and we got online, and Steve took my picture and I took his picture, and that's the story. And Yogi signed he actually signed one of his Hall of Fame postcards. They have baseball Hall of Fame postcards in Cooperstown, with his plaque on the front side, and the back side is blank. So he signed the back, and that's pretty cool. So
absolutely. Cool. Did you ever think back then that you'd be doing a baseball book? Because for those that don't know it, your main passion is hockey, and you are twice published as a hockey author.
Right.
What was different about writing a baseball book than a hockey book?
Well, the first hockey book I did was about the Emil Francis Rangers, and I was able to interview a lot of those guys, call them on the phone, and it was a real thrill to be able to talk to the guys who I grew up watching. So, and that was a thrill. But because of the interviewing, there was a lot of transcribing, and there was a lot of transcribing in this book too. And the other book about Ranger goaltenders was pretty much a history book, looking back on the history of Ranger goaltenders, and that was a lot of research. This book there was minimal research. Once in a while, I would want to fill in some of the blanks that some of the podcast people left out there, and I would do research. And I actually learned a lot from this book about baseball. I thought I knew a lot about baseball, but I found out that there was a lot that I really didn't know, and I enjoyed working on it. It was fun.
Good. What do you notice different about hockey players and baseball players? Personality, mindset. Can you elaborate?
Never had much contact with baseball players, but I will tell you the hockey players of the era that I was talking about, 60s, 70s, early 80s maybe, very nice people. They would go out of their way to help you. I mean, Steve Vickers called me back. Brad Park, I had a interview scheduled with Brad Park one morning at 9:00, and we talked for about an hour, and he had to go somewhere, so he said, "Call me back tomorrow." Now he could have said, "Okay, we're done," but no, he said, "Call me back tomorrow." So I basically had breakfast over the phone with Brad Park 2 days in a row. So you can't beat that kind of cooperation from athletes who really don't have to do this.
Right. Podcasting is nice because the interviews are extended.
Right.
And we used 500 podcasts to break down the show, or 50 podcasts rather, to break down the show. And I'm going to ask you a question that when I interview authors, and I am now an author for the that's just ringing through. But I was thinking about this. I am an author second. I'm a podcaster first. I will remain a podcaster. Multimedia guy. Yes, that's me. In the modern age multimedia guy. My point is, the question I asked a lot of the authors I interview, and I remember asking Peter Golenbach, who wrote a foreword on our book and was nice enough to call it brilliant. We stood by that. We agree. We're not going to blow against the brilliant.
Oh, okay. I didn't know that.
Yeah, you remember. Yeah. I think we both, the glow from both of us when we read that was across country, reached across country.
Yeah.
But my question of him, and same question I'll ask you, the book is done, it's been put to bed. Do you regret not putting something in, or is there anything you regret not putting in, or regret that we put in? Just ask you off the cuff. Is there anything we got to think? I wish we'd said this, that type of thing.
Yeah, I understand what you're saying. One problem that I always had with books I've written is that I'm really never sure when I'm done. The longer I have the book in my hands, the more I want to change it, the more I want to re-edit it, change it, take something out, put something in. And so it's just best to just hand it into the publisher or do whatever you're going to do with it, get it out of my hands. And with this book, too, there's just so much editing you can do. And as far as putting in and leaving out, we had discussed all the podcasts, whether they're going to stay in or come out. I mean, we left everything in.
We left the Nancy Finley interview out.
Yes, yeah. Well, that was Yeah, that was our main discussion as far as that's concerned. Yeah.
Right. We just made a decision based on the way we wanted to present the book.
Because there was no backstory evidence about it, so we had to leave it out.
Right. Yeah. We put her in a very favorable light, and it was her discussion of her dad, Carl Finley, how he was the behind the scenes guy in the Charlie Finley run A's. He basically was the behind the calming force behind the very, very complicated Charlie Finley. Yeah. And I think that's one of the highlights of the book. Presenting, we didn't just present him, but we gave the reader an insight into a number of different owners. Bill Veeck was one that we covered. Right. We covered Horace Stoneham and Walter O'Malley.
Yeah, we did Waltz. Warts and all, because each one of the podcasters came in with something, and it wasn't always very complimentary to some of these owners and some of the general managers and some of the players, and I think that's one of the things that makes the book so interesting, is that it's warts and all. This is the way these people ran their businesses, and sometimes it wasn't pleasant, but it's the game we choose to love. So you got to take the good with the bad.
We added, I'm not all that modest usually anyway, but I think we really added to the history of recording the history of baseball, because there were certain things that we presented that others have tried, but there were certain behind-the-scenes things. We talk about the press box, what goes on in the press box, official scores. Michael Duca gave us information. The team pharmacist, Jerry Feidelberg, gave us some great copy. I'm still very excited about having written it. That's the best thing I can say. And I have to say, you look up and your name is on name in the cover of the book on Amazon. Our names. It's pretty good, pretty freaking cool.
Yes, it is. Yes, it is. It's a real feather in the cap, yeah.
Yeah, and we talked briefly about Noel Hynd helping us. There's a big difference. We wrote a book, but publishing of the book, being a self-publisher as opposed to having your book published. Now, tell me a little bit about how much Noel helped and how much we appreciate his generosity.
I can't tell you how much I appreciate what he did. When you sell your book to a publisher, like I did with my 2 hockey books, you give them the manuscript, and a little while later you get an edited version, and you got to go over and read it and send it back, and in a little while the book is done. There's not a lot of interaction about problems that they're having with your manuscript. But Noel, because of different versions of Word that I guess I was using, he had trouble with some of the pages and some of the table of contents, and he worked it out. He worked through it. He got through it, and I appreciate it so much. And just the fact that he's helping us with the marketing and with the just the overall layout and the production of the book. I would not have been able to do that, and if I did, it would have been a lot longer than 2 weeks. I'll tell you that. We might have had it out sometime next year, because it could have been a very slow process, because I was learning as I was going. But Noel had been through this. He knew what he was doing, and I'm really grateful that he was able to help us.
Good. I feel the same way, and expressing it is nice, because just the tone in your voice.
Oh yeah.
You're sincere. You can't put that on paper and it doesn't come through.
No.
That's why, and we've talked about this. The difference in the two mediums of podcasting and the written word. Both have its advantages, and to me, the main advantage of a podcast is the tone in one's voice and the enthusiasm. And you asked me once, because I chose you to be a podcaster on my network way before we started any of this. You asked me once, what is the makeup of the podcaster that I would choose? And the basic qualifications: enthusiasm, a passion, and a knowledge and a curiosity. And you had all of those, and to have a pleasant voice. And you come through as someone who is interesting to talk to. You know, you don't want to be turned off by the voice if you're a listener.
Thank you, Ralph.
And so you are one, and I hope that answers your question. And the reason I brought that up now is that what makes this book great is not anything that I did in particular, other than get these podcasters together, the ones that were apt to bring together, work together, and bring together a good podcast. So when the guest comes in, you got 2 or 3 people interviewing the guest from different angles.
Right.
And Hal Bach is a good example. George Case III, Alan Blumkin, they all have different, David Hubler, all have different and concise styles. And I think we got the most out of the guests that we brought in and interviewed. And let me remind you that some of the best interviews were with the podcasters.
Right.
That's what brings a uniqueness to this book that I think is worthy. The podcasters themselves all have a story to tell. Hal Bach was an AP head baseball writer for AP, 41 years.
Right.
And he's in his early 80s, and if he sounds like he's 35, 40 years old.
Oh yeah, and he's still very enthusiastic. Yeah, he's fantastic to talk to. He's my co-host on the Retro Rangers podcast, and I love being with him. I bought his first hockey book when I was a kid, and it's just amazing to me that all these years later I'm talking to him on a podcast, and we're working together. I think that's so cool.
You also asked me, this is on point, you asked me why it was that I that it came together that you and I did a book together.
Yeah.
And the answer to that is basically your Walter Mitty type attitude coincides with mine. You think to yourself, I bought this book for years ago, and he's my boy, and now you're working with him and doing this and talking to him on a bit. That's how I felt about Peter Golenbach. I bought his book, and the thrill we both get out of doing this, it really isn't work. It's play. It was work the last 2 weeks, configuring our book to what they needed at Amazon, and and that makes completion all the better. This last week, after it's been published, I've done a lot of reflecting, and it's been a nice week. So I want to thank you for that, because without you, there's
a great sense of accomplishment, and I'm very happy that I was able to help get you published, and it's good. And as far as the Walter Mitty aspect of things, I've always appreciated where I was and how I got there. And like sometimes I just sit here and say, how the hell did I get here? How the hell did I get to know this guy and talk to this guy? How did this happen? And sometimes I'm amazed myself, but it's just a matter of pushing and asking, and it never hurts to ask. Barry Watkins, the Ranger public relations guy back in the 80s, once told me it never hurts to ask. And he's right. That's one of the best pieces of advice I've ever gotten. It never hurts to ask. Because, if you ask nicely, most of the time people will do what you want them to do. We'll sit down with an interview and it'll work out, But you have to,
what is the worst that can happen if you get a no for an answer?
Life goes on.
And that's the way it goes. No. And if you accept that before going in, and most people don't have that nerve to ask. So your competition is only yourself in what you're holding back in having the guts to go for it. It's not anybody else. And we had the guts to ask, and we had the guts to work through this, and I'm proud of us both. I have to tell you, George.
It was good. Yeah. It was. We had a very good working relationship. So.
Yes. The only thing we disagreed on, I can't even think of any disagreement, but the only thing we really discussed was the Nancy Finley thing.
Well, there was also the baseball board games. I wasn't too thrilled. You love them, and I understand people like them. I totally understand. They should be in the book. They just did not my cup of tea, and. But, you got to do what you got to do.
You're the one who said early on that this book has a little bit for everybody. Not everybody's going to like the same thing, but I can't imagine being a baseball fan and not getting some good stuff out of this.
Every chapter. I mean, there's so many things that you can learn. I mean, I was really touched by the chapters about Branch Rickey and Jackie Robinson and Ron Rabinowitz. I had no idea that Branch Rickey was a college coach years before he came to Brooklyn, and he had a black catcher who, of course, couldn't stay in the White Hotel, and Branch offered to have him stay in his room with him, and the poor kid was just so upset he wanted to rip his skin off. It was just very touching chapter, and that's something that you're probably not going to read in too many other places, and just very interesting stuff. I mean, every chapter you're going to learn something.
Good. Hey, George, week number 1 in the book of being, for me, you're a 3-time author. Mm-hmm. I'm a 1-time author. Week number 1. Next week, I go back to being a full-time podcaster. How about that?
Okay.
All right. In my head. But I'd like to get together with you on a weekly basis and discuss what comes up in the marketing of the book and people's reaction. And we'll have some guests. We'll have some guests on that participated in the book, and we can talk to them. I'm excited about this podcast almost as much as I was about the book itself.
Well,
not quite.
The book came out great. I don't have a copy yet, and I know you don't have a copy yet. But
I don't have one, but I've seen pictures of them. I got an email today from my very good friend Sue Freeman. First, she writes, "I'm expecting it today," and then she writes a little memo. "It came today with no warning. There were 500 pages," she said. So, and this is a woman who bought the book because she's a supporter of her friend. It wasn't something she expected, a little book to come by. It's a 500-page book. It can be a textbook. It can be a sociological textbook in schools, because it really presents the inside of an industry in a way that hasn't been presented before.
That's right.
And if you want to know, listeners, if you want to know what goes on behind the scenes, the real stuff that goes on behind the scenes, click on Amazon. And I'm going to send you a link to this. Listeners, when I publish the show, there'll be a link that you can push to click right on and buy the book. And it's available in Kindle as well. The holiday season is coming up. It makes a great gift idea. And give it to some young baseball fan or old baseball fan like myself. And because there's the one thing, you're not as old as me, but you're a middle-aged human being, George, and you mentioned that you learned something.
I'm actually 69 years old, and as Casey Stengel would say, if I'm lucky, in a few months I'll be 70. So right. Point being, you're never too old to learn something. And when we were writing it, my not only Marty was my demographic, but you were my demographic, and I repeatedly asked you how you were responding to it from the standpoint of a potential reader. And my main question to you every week was, is it keeping your interest? Yeah.
And I put a big smile on my face when you answered yes.
Yeah. It was an interesting, project to work on. I mean, and as far as the age group of your readers, the older readers will relive their memories and maybe learn something about the way it was back then, and the younger readers will also learn about the history of baseball. It's a very valuable book that way. I mean, if you really want to learn about the history of baseball, I think that the thing about the history of sports is, I think that every young kid at the time that they first learning about a sport, they think that the sport just began then. You know, when they found out about it, the sport just began then. And then maybe they buy some baseball cards and they see that, oh, Roger Maris used to play for the Cleveland Indians before he was a Yankee. How did that happen? And then they look into it. And that's how you get into the history of sports. You know, just and see who was the manager, who owns the team. You know, this guy used to manage the Yankees before he went to the Oakland A's, and it's you know how everything interacts with something else, and that's what the history of sports is all about.
Right, and it's not just the players; it's the teams themselves that go from city to city, ownership to ownership, sometimes league to league. It's fascinating, and like I say, if you have a passion for baseball, try this one. You'll like it.
Yeah, try it. You'll like it.
All right. We'll be back next week. Thank you, George. Great show.
No problem, Ralph. Good talking to you.
All right. It's always great talking to you. Thank you, my friend.
Bye-bye.
Thanks for listening, everybody. Comfortably Zoned Radio Network. The book that we're talking about, Comfortably Zoned, Dot
Hello?
Ralph Tyko.
Hello?
Grimm. Yes, sir. Good night.
The proceeding has been a Comfortably Zoned network production. You are advised to keep your dreams wet, your humor dry, your children and grandchildren out of military recruiting offices and off the laps of clerics who wear dresses. Thank you for listening, everyone. Happy trails.